Hi there, this is Ma'am Florence, one of the teachers from the biology cluster, and now we will begin our lesson activity in reproduction. I hope you're ready, so sit back, relax, and listen. Thank you. When do division and multiplication mean the same thing? For biology, it is reproduction. This is the biological process by which organisms give birth or give rise to a new organism. This process is seen in all living things, both plants and animals. Okay, first let's talk about plant reproduction. To understand this topic, let us have the different parts of a flower first. So this is a flower of a hibiscus plant, and the sepal is the green leaf-like structure protecting the bud as the flower develops. Collectively, these are called the calyx, over here at the bottom. And then the petal, these are usually brightly colored parts of the flower to attract more pollinators. And collectively, they are called corolla. Other than that, we also have the stamen. This is the male organ of the flower, and the filament is the long filamentous structure, and the bulging tip is called the anther. That's where we find the pollen grains. The pistil is the female organ, and it is made up of a single carpel or a group of fused carpels. A carpel is a vase-like shaped structure which contains the bulging ovary, the slender stalk called style, and the stigma with a sticky tip. For plant reproduction, we have to talk about the alternation of generations. If you look closely into this picture, we will see that this haploid gametophyte generation gives rise to the diploid sporophyte generation. Here on top, the gametophyte forms the gametes, and they will have a fusion to create our diploid zygote cell, which undergoes cell division mitosis to give rise to the sporophyte. And then this will undergo meiosis to create now our spores, which are haploid cells. And this will undergo mitosis to give rise to the gametophyte generation, the haploid gametophyte generation. Okay. For sexual reproduction in plants, the flowering plants are called angiosperms. And the reproduction happens in the sexual organs of plants found in those flowers. As what you've seen in the previous picture, the diploid sporophyte generation produces the haploid gametophyte generation. The male gametophyte gives rise to the pollen grains, which are developed from microspores. And the female gametophyte gives rise to the embryo sac, which is developed from the megaspore. Here, you can see the life cycle of flowering plants. We have the egg and the sperm here, and they are both haploid cells. This will unite, and the fertilization occurs to form this diploid cell, the zygote. This will later become the embryo, 2N because it's diploid, the sporophyte, and it will become the simple fruit with the seed, and that seed will germinate, and it will become a mature sporophyte plant, 2N. And here in the flower of the plant, we have the different sexual reproduction parts, the female part, the pistil, and the male part, the stamen. Next, let's have another picture of the alternation of generations overview. So again, the sporophyte, the diploid sporophyte generation will give rise to our haploid gametophyte generation. Now, for the variation of plants, especially in the flowers, we have monoecious plants. So it means that it's the same plant, but it has different flowers, having different male and female parts, as you can see over here. And we also have the dioecious plants. So it has separate plants for the female and male parts. We also have the hermaphrodite plants, which have hermaphrodite flowers, which means that in the same flower, you can find the male and female parts, just like what you saw in the pictures previously, the hibiscus plant. Now let's look at the stages of sexual reproduction in plants. First off, we have the pollen and egg formation. Then comes pollination. Then after is fertilization. And fourth one, the seed dispersal and germination. Let's take a closer look of each of those. So first, here in the pollen formation, you can see the diploid microspores. They undergo cell division, meiosis, to create the haploid microspores. I'll show you a picture over here. And here we have the anther, and it has 4 regions. And it contains our microsporocyte, which is a diploid cell. This undergoes meiosis, and it will give rise to microspores, which are haploid cells. And then here, the microspores, this will undergo mitosis. So it says here that further mitotic divisions will form pollen grains, or our microgametophyte, with a generative cell and a vegetative or tube cell. The pollen tube, this one, will form the vegetative tube cell, while the generative cell will divide to form 2 sperm cells over here. Okay, so if that's how the pollen is formed, let's see how the egg is formed. Okay, so over here, we can see that this is what an ovule looks like. Inside, we have the embryo sac. And in each ovule, a megaspore mother cell, this one, undergoes meiosis. And it will produce 4 haploid cells. And in most plants, only 1 haploid cell will continue. The 3 cells will degenerate. And this will become the embryo sac, which is a haploid cell. And it undergoes mitosis 3 times. So over here, we now have this embryo sac with 2 polar nuclei and the egg cell. Alright, so that's how the pollen and the egg is formed. Next, I'll show you the overview for the formation of pollen and formation of embryo sac. You can pause the video right here so that you can see it again. Okay, so let's resume. So those pollens created by the flower, sometimes they are manufactured to become supplements and granules for consumption, but other people, they are allergic to it and it can cause hay fever to others. Okay. The next step is called pollination, and this involves the transfer of pollen grains from the stamen to the stigma. We have different types of pollination. We have the self-pollination. So this involves the same plant or the same flower. While the cross-pollination, this involves the different plants and different flowers. And some plants have developed a mechanism to avoid self-pollination because self-pollination reduces genetic variability. And there are agents of pollination. We have the wind, water, and some animals to help with this. Okay, after pollination, here comes fertilization. Okay, so the pollen, this one, it will germinate and it will stick to the gluey, sugary substance covering the stigma. And then the pollen tube grows into the stigma, down the style, and into the ovary. The tip of the pollen bursts to release the two sperm cells. Okay, here. And then the sperm cells migrate down the pollen tube, and one pollen unites with the egg cell over here. And then it will form a zygote. The other pollen fertilizes the two polar nuclei at the center of the embryo sac, which produces a triploid, a 3N, a primary endosperm. The zygote will undergo mitotic divisions, while the primary endosperm will develop into an endosperm, which provides nourishment for the embryo. So it technically becomes like a baby food for that small zygote. Next up, seed dispersal and germination. So we have different agents for that, like the wind in the case of dandelions, water, which happens in acorns and coconuts. That's why we can find a lot of coconut trees near beaches. Animals also, like the birds and bats. And explosion in peas. Next, for germination, this is now the development of a plant from a seed or spore after a period of dormancy. And this will happen if optimal conditions are present, like good water supply, presence of gases, and nutrients. So this starts with a plant embryo, the root, the stem portion, and one or more cotyledons, the first leaves. So the cotyledons, they are green and they will photosynthesize sugars for the growing plant. The plant will continue to draw on the nutrients stored in the cotyledons and other resources. And then after the first two leaves elongate and they extend, those cotyledons will now wither and fall.